We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Hi, and welcome to the first episode ever of the DIY Science Podcast. My name is Joram, and hosting with me tonight is Lucy.
Hi, yeah. So we got to know each other through a project that we've both been working on recently, Science Hack Day Berlin, which is a volunteer-run community hackathon. We're like, so my background basically is in kind of community organization around science. My original background is in molecular biology, but I left the lab some time ago and I've done a few different things since then, including getting into organizing community around science outside of institutions.
Yeah, and I also come from like a similar background. I'm still in academia technically. I'm finishing up my PhD right now in molecular biology. But through the Science Hack Day Berlin, I got really into the open science movement, and especially now what we want to call the DIY science movement. And this is how we got into the idea of doing a podcast about it, which we call then the DIY Science Podcast.
Yeah. So over the last few years, we've been getting in contact with a wider network of projects who, similar to what we've been doing with Science Hack Day in Berlin, they're different communities, groups and projects who are engaging with science in some way, so like doing science or applying science outside of an institutional context. So this is outside of institutions, outside of universities, and outside of companies. And there's lots of different reasons why you would do that and different motivations you would have for doing that. So it could be from people who are into biohacking, building their own molecular biology labs in their kitchen or garage, or in a hackerspace, to building DIY scientific equipment, maybe open source, hopefully open source, or gathering data for environmental activism using DIY tools. Or maybe even using science as a medium for artistic expression. So these communities, they're forming communities of practice who are really learning how to use science and to appropriate science for their own purposes, and opening science up to new perspectives by doing that. It's a kind of civic self-empowerment, and it really goes a long way to making democratizing science, we think. So there are people coming at this from different perspectives, and we're really interested to kind of gather these different stories together under one roof, and we've chosen to call it DIY Science through this podcast and through a few other things, and we really want to show the diversity of this movement, so all of the different things that people are doing around this in this way, show what potential it would have, and try to understand how this fits into the bigger picture of science and society. On the other hand, we really want to learn from one another, so we want to connect communities in a peer-to-peer kind of way. I think Joram wanted to say something about that. Sorry, we're trying not to steal each other's words.
No, it's all right. You already said it. Like the idea of behind this podcast, especially, is that we bring different DIY science communities together and specifically listen to the stories that the members of these communities have to tell. Because just as diverse as these communities are, so are the stories that these people can tell. And with the podcast, we want to give them a forum or like a voice to share their stories, to share their experiences, to share their the things that they have lived through with their communities, how they found their communities, and also to give the possibility to sort of bridge different communities. We found that many communities within each other are very well connected. For example, in Berlin, we have a pretty good picture about the people who are doing projects there, and we're getting in touch with them, and that's very nice. But it's really hard to get then into other cities or other places or other fields to get an insight into their communities. And with this podcast, we're trying to bridge these gaps and bring people together and tell stories across filter bubbles. And so to get the ball rolling, we went ahead and booked a slot here at the Sendezentrum.
Yeah, which is a little bit scary, to be perfectly honest, for some very rather first-time podcasters. Joram has a little bit of experience.
Yeah, a tiny bit of experience.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So we're here in the Sendezentrum at 34C3, the Chaos Communication Congress, and it's a really good spot for us. Really like to be at the home of hackerdom like this. There are quite a lot of projects and some really interesting people here who are from biohacking to bioart, and there's been already some interesting talks on open source scientific tool development. And we are really excited to have with us for an interview for this podcast, Dawn Walker, who's sitting across from us here. She's a PhD student from the University of Toronto, but the reason that we want to talk to her today is about the work that she's been doing with the Environmental Data Governance Initiative, which is a new initiative from the US. And I think actually I'm just going to hand over to you and let you introduce yourself and how you got into this, how you got started with this initiative.
Sure, yeah. First, thanks for having me. I'm also interested in many of the themes and topics that you mentioned, and to learn about other projects, especially I think being based in Canada. Sort of what I'm aware of is more in North America, so seeing kind of what's happening in a European context. So I'm a PhD student, like you said, at the University of Toronto, and I'm kind of interested in themes of data justice and really drawing on techniques that are from participatory design and open source and open hardware. And kind of what I've been doing so far is looking at projects that are kind of already grappling with this, and that kind of comes out of community science or DIY science. I think Public Lab is a great example, or grassroots or counter mapping, and that kind of connects to some of the work I had done in my master's. And then increasingly looking at decentralized web projects. So I don't know if you want me to start by like a bit of an overview of what Edgy is and then how I got involved. Would that be a good?
Yeah, I think it would be really nice if you could just summarize a little bit the work of Edgy and how you got interested in it and how you found your way into the project.
Sure, yeah. So Edgy, I will refrain from saying Environmental Data and Governance Initiative another time after this because it's a mouthful and I stumble over.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles Mackenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Formed in the wake, I guess, immediately after the most recent U.S. election. So there was an email thread sent out to a few researchers. I think like the 14th of November or something like that. So directly after, kind of saying, okay, this happened. Now what? We have to do something. And so it was kind of formed as a reaction or a response to very public statements that kind of showed that there was a risk or a vulnerability to the existing federal climate and energy policy and data infrastructure in the United States. So we're a little over a year old, that means, and in that year, we've kind of grown to a network of over 150 scholars, organizers, and people who are members of sort of related nonprofits. And we're a distributed online organization that kind of has a few key projects that we've done in the past and sort of areas that we're working on into the future. One of the main ones is grassroots archiving of federal environmental and energy data. The other one is an interviewing project where we've spoken to either more senior or recently retired federal employees at key agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency and OSHA. And then another project is monitoring federal websites to see sort of shifts in access and context, and I'm happy to speak about that more probably in relation to the archiving, because kind of we didn't know what to expect, and sort of all of these sort of grew out of what we were seeing in the moment. So I see the monitoring and archiving work as really linked, and interestingly, like they complement each other in interesting ways, but difficult to like give a one-line synopsis of. Yeah. And one of the other areas that we've been doing is something that we call capacity and governance. So thinking about, in response to new policy that's put forward or proposed changes, providing what we kind of frame as rapid academic analysis, and also thinking about providing public statements that sort of analyze and speak to and try and understand sort of potential impacts of this. And then the last one, which is more of an emerging area, is environmental data justice. And so that's us sort of, I think, drawing from many people in EDGI's background in environmental justice and their work, with and as a part of environmental justice communities, and kind of emerging data justice organizing that's happening. A good example would be the Detroit Community Technology Project's work, but then also the way that data justice is being discussed in academia. I'd say like critical data studies being one of those sites. And so sort of I think there's this way that environmental justice kind of positions data that could be at odds with the way it's positioned by data justice scholars, kind of coming out of the disciplines that they're working from. And so trying to like understand that tension and thinking about what's afforded by reconciling an understanding of data justice that's coming from kind of being conscious of surveillance, and then also environmental justice, which is really aware of why access and openness and transparency of data is really important.
And so how did you then get involved into this? So you were part of this initial mailing list, and that was like immediately the point where you said like, yes, that's it, that's the stuff I want to work on?
No, I wasn't actually, but I got involved pretty quickly in December. So I have said I'm based in Toronto, and a couple of the people who were on that initial email were based in Toronto, Michelle Murphy, Patrick Gilty, and Matt Price. And kind of one of the first things that happened was that EDGI organized an event called Guerrilla Archiving, and it was held December 17th in Toronto, kind of as quickly as possible to mobilize something. And at that event was really starting to think through, this was before we had any plan about like what grassroots archiving might look like in this context for environmental data. Sort of trying to both do some, but then also strategize about how to keep doing it in the lead up to the inauguration and then after, because we didn't really know how fast changes could come, but we're really seeing January 20th as this big day where, the day after, things could immediately shift. And so because these people in Toronto were already involved, Matt Price had come to a Civic Tech Toronto meetup, and so Civic Tech, I don't know if Code for America or Civic Technology Movement is something that's sort of popular or thing that people are aware of here in Europe?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly in Berlin we know a lot about, we have quite a few nice civic tech initiatives.
Awesome.
Not necessarily working in the science space, but... Sorry, my microphone keeps falling away from my mouth. Sorry. It's something that we know about in Berlin for sure.
Cool. Yeah. So the Civic Tech Toronto, this is not my community, so I don't want to say it and be wrong, but is an old and well-established one in Canada. It might be the oldest, but I don't know. And meets weekly on a Tuesday night, and kind of has a structure which I think is quite similar to Chai Hack Night, so in Chicago. And there's a space for you to come and say, I have a problem, or there's this data set I want to work with, or there's this upcoming event, and if other people care about it, let's figure out a way to work on it. So Matt Price had come to that and talked about sort of this emerging edgy and this upcoming event, and I was there, and I said I want to help. So that's it. Weirdly, because we're both at the same institution at the University of Toronto, met at Civic Tech, and that's how I got involved.
So this is a civic, like a independently organized event that brings lots of different people from different backgrounds together. And Matt Price is also an academic, or
yeah.
Okay.
So I had Civic Tech Toronto. They have such great language. I think that's pretty inclusive about. It's not really framed as like solutionist or like only tech, but it is sort of people who I think are interested in technology and design, and then also civic problems, kind of trying to see how those could be threaded together, and ways to improve situations, but also are really mindful of issues like inclusivity and who gets left out of the design process and and like when you implement a technical solution, what maybe could be lost. And so it's just a great site, I think, for people who have like a bit more of a civic approach to technology, which is maybe a little different than some of the other regular meetups.
Cool.
And so how did it happen that like this meeting was in Toronto and not in the US, when it's like a US-based startup that you're interested in? Is there like other initiatives like that, or like in parallel other meetings of the same initiative in the US as well? Or is it sort of like based from outside, bringing like immediately outside the country on safe service?
So just to backtrack a little bit, overwhelmingly EDGI members, I think, are based in the States right now. There's a core of us who are in Toronto, and this is a question we get asked, I've been asked before, and I think one of the reasons why is because just immediately preceding the kind of this moment and Trump's election, in Canada, we had Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, who kind of had staged his own what was called like a war on science, but I think at a different scale. With the benefit of hindsight, it looks quite modest to me, honestly, but that's a personal opinion. And so I think we had this immediate experience, and it had kind of happened fast, or there was a way that the impacts of these changes kind of seemed to be broader ranging than we anticipated. So like labs were closed, library programs that were holding certain types of records were ended, and some of those records, were like they just like got rid of the holdings, and they had said that it was, it was unclear. They had said they had deduplicated, or there was some sort of way they guaranteed that they had kept at least one copy of this record. But people were really concerned about the loss of sort of that like longitudinal data. And then, additionally, there was restrictions on what scientists could say to the press. So there had already been, I think we were a little bit primed. And so people who were originally involved with planning the Guerrilla Archiving event, many of them had been really active in sort of mobilizing engagement around those issues in Canada. And so I think, in a sense, maybe we're like a little bit primed or had that prior experience to kind of motivate an initial, like, okay, this could be, we don't know the scale of this, but we recognize that it could be of a large scale.
Mm.
So you already had that deadline of the 20th of January in mind, and like how quickly did you manage to kind of build up the organization to kind of work towards that deadline? What were your early plans? Like, how did you start figuring out how you were going to play this?
Yeah, so Edgy is, I should also say this about Edgy. It's a distributed organization where also we make decisions by consensus and are really interested in thinking about kind of and trying to enact these non-hierarchical organizational protocols. And so a lot of this has been really like emergent and unfolding. What had happened sort of back in December and January, which feels so long ago, but really is only a year ago, was that there had already been some people who are willing to take the lead on a few key areas. So that the archiving and sort of knowing that we were interested in preserving or ensuring that data didn't disappear was really important. And then also thinking about the institutional memory that sort of could be lost by employees leaving or job cuts. So there's a steering committee for Edgy, and sort of many of the members who are sitting on the steering committee have been very active through many of the sort of areas that Edgy projects have been happening in, and they were kind of like taking the lead on those. So the first event was really led, I think, by Michelle Murphy and others in Edgy. It's sort of hard to do like single authorship or sort of. It's important too, but it's also there's so many people and it's so hard to try to make sure you recognize everyone's work. But so that event had happened, but also we had reached out and kind of been contacted by other people who were interested in doing work, and so it very quickly partnered with another organization called Data Refuge. There was a few other backup projects, sort of Climate Mirror, Project Azimuth, and had started talking with Internet Archive about how we could funnel stuff into their collection, because the Internet Archive, in partnership with a library program, actually does end-of-term crawls, because that's sort of they recognize at the end of a presidential term is a time where a lot of the content on websites, federal websites, could change. And so they had already had this existing end-of-term archiving program that had run for 2 previous end-of-terms, and had a way for people to nominate stuff in addition to their own selection process. And so kind of really early we identified contributing to that as one of the key ways to have people ensure that at least sort of like landing stages and certain types of data would be archived. And so we started talking with partners and then end up kind of jointly coordinating with Data Refuge to hold what got known as data rescue events. And in advance of January 20th, this is like maybe where my numbers might not be accurate. I think 3 were held of what wound up being 49. So
and that was across the US,
the states,
and Canada as well.
Yeah. So the first one was in Canada, but all of the remaining data rescue events were in the States. We've had subsequent sort of related events and kind of development sprints and stuff like that have been like in multiple locations, including Toronto. But yeah, for data rescues, they're primarily in the States.
And what kind of people did you have coming along to those events?
It was a really big mix, which is really exciting. And I think kind of signified that, this was kind of the question of like, how do we preserve access to environmental data and who cares about it and who uses it or who it impacts, even if they aren't like a direct like user of data, is a wide group. And the Data Refuge people are it's a project that is based at a Penn and at the libraries there as well. So there is a fair number of people from a library and archival background, also people who are employees at agencies. So are scientists and work with this data because they're kind of at those agencies, or people who work with that data who are academics, who kind of have a stake in it or understood what was the data that was important to them from key agencies. In addition, we had just a lot of people from the public who had heard about it and it mattered to them and wanted to do something and kind of felt this like urgency to respond. I think, I think that was a common theme that I heard from people was just like, I want to help. I want to figure out how I can be involved, and this feels important.
Can you estimate like some rough numbers of how many people you got involved sort of from the start or in the like early period? Because like this was then in 2 months. You said you had like 4 events already organized between like December and 20th January.
It's 49, you said. Huh?
And the 49 goes into June. So there was
June, but
3, 4 before January 20th, and then after.
Yeah. So like, how many people could you mobilize so quickly?
I think so. We don't have accurate numbers on that, and so I wouldn't want to.
Rough. Is it like in the like tens or hundreds or?
So of attendees, we have some estimates that are in like over 1,000, so thousands of people who attended all events. Some were quite small, some were over 200 people at one event. There were local organizers who did all of that, like really. Difficult labor of throwing together an event very quickly, and as someone who's done that, I really credit them for the success of all of these events. And there had been initial outreach from the Data Refuge and Edgy people to people they knew across the state. So we had kind of done this initial relying on people we just knew from prior efforts and kind of knew had a similar interest to see if they were able to hold an event or knew someone there, and that was kind of like a way that we were trying to like spark maybe that interest in organizing. But then at some point it kind of the people who were there who were interested sort of took on that coordinating work.
And were there like specific tools or like software, like how did you organize all of this? Like did you just like engage with some like key players who then did like all of the local organization, or like coming myself from like with a little bit of experience of how to organize this stuff, I can tell like how hard it is already. It was like 10-15 people to organize one event. But what you did at Edgy, at Edgy, it's very impressive to me to hear like how quickly you got these numbers of people together to work together on a common goal, even in a distributed way, but still like were there like some tools you could elaborate or something where you say like, this is how we got the people sort of together?
Yeah. Those were also emergent. So we started with like, I think the tools that we had used before. And in terms of, I'll answer this 2 ways, but like ask a clarification if I'm not answering exactly what you're interested in. Edgy itself kind of uses Slack and kind of this growing number of tools I'm happy to talk about a little bit later to coordinate within itself. And that is a little distinct from how we were helping coordinate the data rescue events. So for that, it was definitely a lot at the beginning of like using Google Spreadsheets. There was an open Slack that anyone could sign on to that was mostly organizers who came onto. Some used it also for their event, but if it was quite a large event, that kind of could get a little bit like raucous, I guess. So we started with this sort of Google Sheets workflow, which was there was a way that we were, these were separated, kind of tracking potential organizers or then like events that were in progress. Also, the Data Refuge folks had sent out this survey asking people, scientists, what data sets they were most concerned about. So kind of trying to like get a little bit of a pulse for what people felt was vulnerable. Which I think also we had been reaching out to people we knew who were in those agencies or people who might have a stake or an interest as well. But that survey I think was a really great way to kind of get a feel for types of data that people felt was important and were really actively using. And then in addition, we kind of had this sort of triaging who was working on what, because very quickly there was almost overlapping events or people who would start a thing. And that was also originally Google Sheets, which is now, to look back at, terrifying. And I think before before February, so I think probably after the third or fourth event, we actually flipped to using this custom, basically workflow React app that is open source. All of Edgy, everything that has been developed by Edgy volunteers and contributors, is all the code is up on our GitHub page, and so we had this workflow data management app, and that had also kind of developed in sync with us kind of understanding what would be important in terms of doing any of this preservation or archiving work, and kind of what that what that cycle of moving or preserving that data would look like. And so again, I think people who had a really strong experience in electronics records preservation and libraries, I think raised a lot of key considerations about how you want to preserve citability and thinking about integrity, and sort of how you have that verifiable or way to trust that this copy you're looking at, which is not on a federal depository, might be the same thing or is the same thing if it were to ever go down from a federal depository. And so we kind of had this workflow. The whole workflow and documentation is also up. I'm happy to provide a bunch of links if you want to make them available to your viewers. And so it kind of, the process got divided into a few phases. And I think that was also recognizing that we had a range of backgrounds and of people coming to these events. And so there were people who kind of just heard about it and wanted to do something. And so we had a group of people who were doing what was called seeding and sorting. And that was kind of looking at, and based on sort of priorities established from that survey as well as other sources, these federal web pages, which can be quite Byzantine, and also kind of where data is on them is not always clear, and you may have to drill down to get to an important thing, and actually nominating those sort of maybe lower pages that might have been missed by just a higher level crawl from the Internet Archive's end of term crawl. Nominating those ones as well to be the starting point for a crawl. I don't know if I feel like this might be a little too in-depth, but just to say that there are kind of constraints on how crawls are configured to be run for the end of term, which means there's a chance that certain pages won't be archived. So we had people kind of just do this surveying of web pages, sort of saying, okay, this was identified as important, or we're looking at this chunk of programs and we're going to go and make sure that the Internet Archive crawler could start at some of these lower down or lower in the hierarchy pages, and to try and make sure that they get archived there. Then we had also additionally started running into pages that, again, due to constraints with that web crawler, we had a reasonable, I guess, thought that they wouldn't be able to be archived, and highly dynamic and interactive web content is sort of this type. And as a point is why that's really important, especially for environmental justice advocacy, is there's a lot of times where communities or advocates are accessing kind of really important data through these interfaces where you have to search or complete some sort of query and then get behind some wall before you find this data set, and they're kind of the more user friendly, but at times I think still pose access barriers interfaces. And so the fact that those are ones that are really not able to be archived, I think is a really an ongoing interesting challenge and tension, or that I think we're aware of and thinking through here. But we kind of knew, okay, we know this thing probably won't be archived, but this is important as a resource, and people are using this as a resource, and we want to make sure that we recognize that. So we were quickly finding those things. And so then there was this sort of phase where we were researching and trying to identify, okay, if they're not archiving, not able to be archived by this crawler, why? And then let's sort of classify it a little bit, and then let's sort of triage it and sort of give a bit of an estimation and fill out some information about what we think the problem is or a potential solution, and then actually having people writing custom scrapers and scripts to then get some of that content. And so we kind of had this multi-phase workflow that was all managed using this React app, and kind of worked at that point too, because we had gotten to the point where there was multiple events on the same weekend. So having having this thing as a way to coordinate across them was a little bit better. People could like check in and check out, and you could see the like sort of history of who like had been involved in researching or who had done an initial categorization and said, oh, this doesn't look like it's able to be archived by the Internet Archive's web crawler.
Yeah.
I feel like it's funny too. I'm like sort of in the like trenches of all of this like terminology. So please stop me if it's a little
No, it's
too
fascinating to hear like everything that you had to learn and the new processes you had to create to make all of this happen. It just seems so frustrating that this was important in the first place, that like the authorities that created those sites and those databases in the first place, now with hindsight, it looks like there should have been some more accessible, like a better way of accessing the data, and obviously nobody ever thought about that beforehand, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think that is entirely true. I mean, I think through this process, I think that's what it felt like. Absolutely. And I think we were kind of like jumped in, tried to learn as much we could, sort of reached out to where we thought or where we noticed people who had been doing a lot of this work. And then I think we discovered, I think as everyone does, you kind of have to learn the hard way. There are, but maybe difficult to see as an outsider, different ways that people have been trying to grapple with these problems for a long time within like the digital preservation and web archiving community. But I think you're absolutely right that it's not that they're necessarily resolved. So these are still like kind of active sites where there's like trade-offs, but as someone who really just cares about this data and isn't a web archivist or isn't a librarian or a digital preservationist, can you say it like that? I don't have those years of experience, or we didn't, and so it's kind of like managing that like that need for that, or the way that maybe the people's awareness of like all of the factors at play, how we get access to that expertise, I think is really important. Or it's something where I think we ran aground of like not having it at times where it could have really helped us understand like a strategy or a path forward. Also I think there are all of these efforts that are trying to address it in open science in particular, right? And I think like Research Data Alliance and all of these groups are doing a lot to think about interoperability, like resilient, multiply redundant storage, all of these things around data, and like data governance policies. And in the United States, there's a electronic records depository program, and there's librarians who really care about this and are doing a really good job of like advocating for ways that the policy needs to be modernized to account for new forms of data or new forms of publishing data, because how websites are handled under that is a little bit they're treated different. But there's I think a strong case to be made for why websites have become a really important source of data for a lot of people. So I feel like there's a lot of ways that maybe people are trying to grapple with this, but it almost was like it just hasn't gotten there yet. But it's really exciting to see all these efforts that are kind of, I think, addressing some of the underlying issues.
Yeah.
Could you maybe, like, just to give an example, you touched already a lot of it, but could you give us an example like how this actually works? Because like we talk about sort of like meta concepts now of like data archiving, data like crawling using these archiving crawlers. But in practice, how can I imagine it working? So you have like a government agency, and they have data, and you fear that this data might be lost at one point. Like what are the steps then, more or less in practice? Can you like give us some small introduction in how it actually works?
Sure. Do you want me to say the way it happened at like a data rescue event? Because there were a bunch of parallel efforts that some of them just there's a lot of FTPs where either they're open or you can request a login that just have like raw data that people were going and downloading and mirroring. So that was a little different than the edgy approach. So at a data rescue event, basically what would happen is it would have been organized, advertised, a little bit of prior information just trying to describe what we're doing.
Something very strange is happening.
No worries.
Something is like...
We're not entirely sure what it is.
I'm also like... I also
for
have
the
no
for the
idea.
listener, it's I think music.
Yeah.
Highly.
Exactly.
It's the perfect place to play music next to the podcasting center. Yeah, I hope it's not like too loud on our microphones. We definitely have it on our headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's pick up. It's I think
yeah,
we have a break at least, if not a reprieve.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so at a data rescue event, typically they kind of had a focus on one area, maybe tied to who ended up being an organizer, or maybe some of the people who had prioritized data sets, saying like this is an area that people haven't looked at before. So it would be an agency. Edgy really, I think, cared a lot about the EPA, which isn't so much holding climate data, but environmental data and data that's used really heavily in environmental justice advocacy. And I think why Edgy cared a lot about that was that there had been enough public statements that were kind of making clear that EPA was a target or under threat for cuts. So there had been, before an event, there would have been perhaps some focus of like what agency would be the one that people would be looking at. I think 3, but a few Edgy members had developed this kind of classification scheme, so like a way to kind of categorize different website, the different agency kind of like sub-programs, and so it kind of helped people understand or kind of group what they were looking at or know what to look for to kind of segment different people at an event. So when you came to an event, there was sort of an initial welcome and a bit of a triage. So saying, if you have experience browsing the web, and or like working with browser extensions, or like a bit of experience like looking at websites and sort of understanding their underlying structure, the seeding and sorting, so reviewing websites would be a great place. If you have some maybe front-end development experience, or development experience more broadly, especially if you've written a scraper before, or you know anything about scraping and web scraping, or a crawler, or if you know anything about web archiving, which was a bit of a rarity at these events in terms of people who showed up, then you may want to go to the research and what was called harvesting area. And then if you are like a expert in any of these types of data sets, like there's kind of a range of things. We ended up pairing people together or working in small groups, so kind of trying to like distribute some of that expert knowledge about these particular data sets. And then we typically, this sort of depended on the event, but at many events there was sort of a storytelling track, which I think was trying to capture why people cared about it or why they were there, and putting that up on Twitter or taking photos, maybe making like a Storify, or doing sort of some of this like ethnographic documenting of data rescues, or why people were cared about environmental data. And then there was typically kind of like a let's talk long-term strategy track, which is a little more open-ended, because people come to these events, and I think even if you do your best job to try and set expectations, everyone comes with a range of expectations, so trying to be inclusive of that, and then also inclusive of people's background and experience. So you would come, have a welcome, kind of self-identify and move into one of those different tracks, but also you could move throughout the day as people did. And then because we had like some advanced coordination with that local organizer, that the organizer would be like, this is the area that we're going to focus on, or this agency, or this group of programs. And then kind of throughout the day checking in and making sure that people are working on those. Do you want me to go more in depth about the workflow? I mean, there's
I'm actually quite curious how you actually scrape the data off the servers, because the servers, or like the repositories that I know from like my limited like overview of like biological data, for example, they're often really hard to access. Like there's not like you can get individual pieces of data. Like in my case, let's say like a gene information of something that somebody investigated at one point. But if I wanted to get like the whole picture, like all of the data that was put in that library, there are not straightforward ways often. So that's why I see, from my point of view, I see that that's where it's a big struggle to get that data. So maybe you could, give an overview of how you actually get the data off the servers.
Yeah, I mean, I think, our first attempt was like, let's let the Internet Archive and their crawler grab it, because that's what they do. And also, like, their preservation policy is like, we will preserve this for as long as possible. That's great. Then for things that weren't able to be archived in that way, or that we had sort of categorized as that, it was always a little bit bespoke. We developed like a set of scripts that were kind of like easily repeatable tools that you could use in your browser using like the developer pane to like, extract all of the URLs on a page, and then run like, so you'd have to be familiar with the command line, because then you would, run like a bash script to then like download a bunch of those things, and kind of we had a pattern where you would be building like a base URL and then all of these sort of like paths afterwards that were, say here as an example from the EPA, like an environmental impact statement, the EIS reports. That was one that there wasn't a way for a web crawler typically to access it because of how the query, how a query was used to generate the list of them. But then we saw, so you would like research this, you could sort of see that there was a pattern for the things that were being generated. And so we just had a script that like looped through all of the possibilities and tried to download them. And then that didn't work. And so then we went through a variety of like tested and failed solutions before we got to actually running, there's a few existing, more than a few, there's existing open source projects that are for scraping and popular libraries for that. There are also kind of like all-in-one projects that are for running a web crawler, or kind of running like a headless like browser or things like that you can do a lot of that like pre-programming or automation work. So we wound up actually building a work file using, I'm forgetting the program right now for that one in particular, but using one of these programs where we fed it a list of potential URLs, and it tried to visit them all, and then it was sort of off running on a machine that we had access to elsewhere. But I mean, this raises the issue of like, requiring certain types of infrastructure, people having a certain level of technical comfort or familiarity, like setting up something on like a server somewhere that you're like, they're going to SSH into, and then like at the end of the event, like kind of move on from, and then you're going to, somehow have preserved the data from this. So I think it like it's a massive task, and it's not consistent, and kind of each one of these things that was not able to be archived, in many cases was a bespoke, like there was a new solution for each. Like there were kind of like these sort of configurable or like modular components that we kind of brought together to kind of speed it up. And after a while, you kind of could see these patterns. And so we had developed these ways of triaging to try and start to group them or see those. I mean, I think the other point to raise is that in many cases, that may be the kind of what we found is and was flagged as not harvestable might have been the sort of most human readable like landing page for that data. And in many cases, there would be additional ways to access it. And some of those involve like, emailing an agency, or some of those are available on an FTP. But then that data has a different context, and context is like super important, I think, to understand like recovering it, especially like recovering it in an exploratory way. Like if you don't know what you're looking for specifically, like you're like not aware of like that year and that report exists, you're just trying to find information that's like more generally about a topic, that context is critical. And I mean, I think the people who are librarians and archivists who are involved really help kind of, I think, shape or make us really recognize that. Is that?
Yeah. No, that's super fascinating. I'm really enjoying to hear about that.
So, I'm also curious, like, how far did you get? How much data did you save? And are you still working on it? Like, what's happening now?
Yeah, that is one of those like huge questions or like a question. No, we thought there was an easier answer until we started. Maybe that's the right way of putting it. So one, I actually don't think we don't know what a total is, right? Like that. So it's hard to say how far we got when we couldn't actually tell you how much is out there, because it's sort of distributed across all of these federal agencies. And, many of them are, not many, they all have their own ways of preserving and like backing up and having like redundant storage, and particularly in the context of like climate data. But then in addition, the data.gov program in the United States, I think, is really trying to build a catalog. So there is at least a way of understanding how much is out there, but it's not mandatory, so not everything is in there right now. I think in an ideal world, there could be a way that we would have a comprehensive catalog, but there isn't one. And actually, there was a project by members of the DAT project, who I think do a lot of open science work. That was I'm gonna maybe pronounce this wrong. Project Svalbard. And it was like sort of like, hey, let's take this metaphor of the seed vault and think about a data catalog vault for environmental and climate data. And it's published on DAT, and I think it's been updated a few times. We like pinned our own, like, hey, we want to make sure that this catalog exists, so it's like pinned on a machine that Edgy is running somewhere. So one, we don't exactly know how much is out there, so it's hard to say completion. In terms of our targets, Edgy originally was like, we're going to help and like be part of a movement that backs up all of it. And then we were like, okay, what is all of it? We could be here forever. And kind of and this sort of connects a little bit to the emergence of sort of the web monitoring work. The things changed. We didn't know what to expect. And then, what could have been an outcome didn't come to pass, which was mass immediate takedown of like wide swaths of data. So there have been a few key, very sort of scoped or constrained cases where key data sets were taken down, and they've all been really well publicized. And I would hope that part of the reason that they're known, and maybe because of Data Rescue and all of the Climate Mirror's work and Project Azimuth and everyone who is participating, that there is less than there would have been otherwise, but that's like an impossible measurement. And that's like, that's just like my hope, right, is that because everyone was so engaged and so many eyes were on it, and it did garner considerable media attention and coverage, that it kind of foreclosed upon that being a possibility.
Scared the administration away from removing it immediately themselves. But then the kind of what we were seeing and what we have seen is that kind of how that data is presented is shifting, and that kind of reframing it can be subtle. It could be more broad, is actually like blocking access to some key resources, or kind of like completely changing where you would find it on a site. But that is actually really important. Like the way something is framed will again impact how someone accesses it. And so one of the other parts of Edgy has been writing reports and having a team of volunteer analysts reviewing like side-by-side web snapshots of different versions of a subset of really important, again, sort of important based on people's priorities that were surfaced during like surveys and outreach in federal environmental and energy pages. And we have seen changes, and I think we're at 21, 22 reports on that, and those additionally have been covered by the media. And so you've seen perhaps some of these discussions were saying, like, the words climate change are disappearing from certain pages, or resources that are about like child education about climate change are being removed, or kind of like a language that moves from a recognition of climate change to something where it's framed as like just about energy and stuff like that. And so I think that has maybe wound up being more the trajectory that was taken. And so, trying to figure out a way to understand that and publicize that and sort of like assess that has been, this other Edgy project. And where those resources, where things have been reframed or data sets are less accessible than they were before, is Edgy able to provide an alternative? Does it work like that, or?
So we are, for those ones, we're providing a report that describes the change. In many cases, and if you go to our website, we have we link into where a lot of the archive versions of things are held. So this includes the Internet Archive. They sort of have this way that you could just look at the end of term collection, or you could use the Wayback Machine more broadly to look at snapshots of pages. Additionally, from the data rescue events, things went into a data refuge repository. So you could go to that repository, which has described with metadata the data sets that came out of the data rescue event. So you could go and access them there as well. And then I think we kind of point to some other ways to look at the other projects that had done some archiving, so you could see if maybe they also hold a copy. But I mean, I think this also flags there's a lot of hard problems in thinking about access and how you show who has coverage of what. We have this experimental coverage visualization where we're trying to understand what we got out of what we thought we were going to get. So that's not the same as what we got out of what was there. And then trying to see if what is elsewhere is sort of this additional step. So we're aware of the different repositories that are sources, but it's hard to kind of search into those in the way that it is to search into all, we can't search into all of them in the same way. So then also then trying to pull out and say this is here is complex.
And what is the best way now for people to get involved into this? I mean, I wish we would have.
We're running a little bit out of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
I wish
sorry.
No. I wish we would have more time to really go in depth in this.
You.
I find it fascinating, but just quickly, maybe are there attachment points for people now to get involved into this, on a individual scale up to really getting involved in the project itself?
And what is Edgy working on going forward as well? So what are the priorities now with all of this experience that you've had?
Sure, yeah. So we absolutely, if people are interested, I would love for them to reach out. And the main way, I think, would be to go to our website, which is envirodatagov.org. I'm not going to spell it out. I'm going to hopefully just provide a link.
We will link to everything.
We can do links.
And there's a newsletter and a way to reach out to say, hey, I want to join. And so membership is open, but we have a nomination process. And that just means you sort of say a little bit about your background and what you might be interested in working on. Of the initial projects that I described, they're all kind of ongoing. Just because we talk so much about archiving, I'll just say really briefly that that has shifted a little bit. So kind of in July, after the end of the data rescue events, we kind of reflected, and we had a town hall, which also included data rescue event organizers, to kind of talk about what worked, what didn't. And sort of thinking ahead, and kind of out of that process of reflecting, we and kind of making concrete sort of conversations that were already happening and collaborations, are doing this project called Data Together. I'm holding a sticker. I just thought I would hold it and look at it.
It's a very nice hexagonal sticker.
Yeah,
it's very nice.
It's so great.
Colors are very nice.
Credit to Brendan O'Brien for the design.
Right.
And so with Data Together is kind of this way that Edgy, in collaboration with Query and Protocol Labs, who are developing interplanetary file system, IPFS, to think about how decentralized forms of content addressed versus location addressed data could allow for better forms of archiving or access, and so how people who care about data can hold copies of it, and how that that form of holding a copy is being able to be linked or verified as the thing that they think they're holding. And I think part of that came out of this recognition where, a lot of the issues that we were tackling and the tensions or the barriers or the challenges we faced, I think connect to more broadly to some issues with underlying internet infrastructure that a lot of people have been surfacing. So, a lot of Mozilla's Internet Health Report, I think they talk about some of this stuff. I think a lot of other people who are involved in open science initiatives, so like IPFS and DAT project, who are thinking about new protocols as a way to understand data storage or kind of data publication, people are already there, and that's us sort of seeing, our work aligns with how you're already thinking about these issues, and I think there's something that we could bring, with our kind of the area of data we care about to working on this together.
So it's more about how to do more resilient data governance in the future, how we can move to a different system.
Yeah. And so it's pretty in process, and we're kind of having all the conversations publicly. So right now it's all on GitHub, and we have a website, datatogether.org. So it's definitely a bit of convening a conversation around these issues. And then also we have this reference implementation of actually a decentralized way of archiving data and sort of archiving it in a way that is a standard web archiving format. It's called a work. I would say the sum up call to action is go to our website, sign up for the newsletter, send an email saying you want to join Edgy. You can also jump on our GitHub and contribute to the conversation about data together there.
So unfortunately I have the unfortunate task to wrap this up a little bit now, but I believe tomorrow you're giving a talk here, right? So people can tune in at the live stream. The beautiful thing about C3 is that all the talks are live streamed. So maybe you can quickly plug your talk tomorrow, and is the ways to reach you on Twitter or something like that.
Sure, yeah. So I'm going to be talking about, I think, many similar things, but the talk is called Ensuring Climate Data Remains Public. It's at 10:30. I don't know our time zone right now. And in the Borg Hall. I'll talk about stuff a little more similarly to what I talked about right now, but also I think speak a little more to futures. And I probably should have timed myself better today. And if you want to find me, if you want to find me, I'm my name online is DCWALK, DC Walk, and that's me on GitHub, but also on Twitter it's DC Walk and then an underscore after.
Cool.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I wish we would have more time, but I encourage everyone to either watch the live stream tomorrow if you're listening to this live, or if you listen to this as a podcast later on. There will be a recording available also on media.ccc.org, I believe, but we will put all the links in the description to this. So right now, all that is left to do is thank you once more, Dawn Walker, for this fascinating brief look into the work at Edgy. I will definitely ask you more stuff later on when the mics are off.
Go and get a drink after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you very, very much for being our first podcast guest.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Very cool start for us. So
and now, if you want to get in touch with us, we are also on Twitter under DIY Science Podcast. If you search for that, you should find us. The handle is DIY Sci Podcast. We are Lucy and Joram, and the last thing I want to do is thank the Sendezentrum, who very kindly hosted us today, provided us with the infrastructure, and they're very, very nice people. Thank you very much to the Sendezentrum, and we wish you a very nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.